The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly as Hazel O'Sullivan steered her wagon across the vast Oklahoma territory, sweat beading on her forehead and her heart heavy with determination. It was 1885, and at 22 years old, she was traveling alone toward a future she could barely envision, carrying everything she owned and the weight of her past in a single wooden wagon. Hazel adjusted her bonnet against the blinding sun, squinting at the horizon where the endless prairie seemed to melt into the blue sky. She'd left St. Louis 3 weeks ago after burying her father, her last living relative. The small ranch she was heading to had been purchased sight unseen, with the last of her inheritance 200 acres of promise near the growing settlement of Coyote Creek. Just a few more hours, Bessie, she murmured to the tired mare pulling her wagon. Then we'll both get some proper rest. The horse nickered softly in response, her ears flicking back and forth as she plodded steadily forward. Hazel reached for her canteen, taking a small sip of the tepid water, rationing it carefully. The journey had been harder than she'd expected. Growing up as a shopkeeper's daughter hadn't prepared her for the harsh realities of the frontier. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, were now calloused and sun-browned, her elegant dresses traded for practical cotton and denim. She pulled out the worn letter from her pocket, reading it again, though she'd memorized every word. It was from the land agent, Mr. Finnegan, describing the property a small cabin, a barn in need of repair, and good water from a creek that ran through the southeast corner. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Nobody could take it from her. Nobody could tell her what to do with it or how to live her life. The shadows were growing longer when Hazel noticed the first signs of trouble. A plume of dust to the north caught her eye, riders moving fast. Her stomach tightened with apprehension. In 3 weeks of travel, she'd learned that strangers often meant danger, especially for a woman alone. "Come on, Bessie," she urged, snapping the reins. The tired horse quickened her pace slightly, but Hazel knew they couldn't outrun mounted men. She glanced behind her, checking the shotgun her father had insisted she bring. It was loaded, but she'd never fired it at anything besides tin cans. The riders were gaining quickly now, 6 men on horseback, their faces obscured by bandanas, closing in like wolves circling prey. Hazel's hands trembled on the reins as dusk began to settle across the plains, painting the landscape in reds and purples that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Ho there, miss," called the lead rider, a large man on a black stallion. "Seems you're a long way from anywhere." The men spread out, effectively surrounding her wagon, as she pulled Bessie to a reluctant halt. There was nowhere to run. "I'm heading to Coyote Creek," Hazel said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her racing heart. "My property is just a few miles ahead." The men exchanged glances, and one of them laughed a sound that sent chills down Hazel's spine. "Coyote Creek, eh? That's mighty interesting." The leader moved his horse closer. "See? We don't get many travelers out this way, especially not pretty young ladies on their own. Seems dangerous." "I can manage just fine," Hazel replied, her hand inching toward the shotgun hidden beneath the seat. "I'm sure you can," the man said, his eyes tracking her movement. "But there's tolls to be paid on this stretch of land. Isn't that right, boys?" The others murmured their agreement, tightening the circle around her wagon. Hazel's throat went dry. "I don't have much money." "That's a shame." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I'm sure we can find some other way for you to pay." He reached for the wagon. Hazel grabbed the shotgun, pointing it squarely at his chest. "Stay back!" The weapon felt heavy and awkward in her hands, but she kept it steady. The leader's smile vanished. "Now, that ain't very neighborly. Boys, seems the lady needs to learn some manners." 2 of the men dismounted, approaching the wagon from different sides. Hazel swung the gun back and forth, knowing she couldn't keep them all at bay. Panic rose in her throat as the day's last light faded, leaving them in the gathering darkness. "I said stay back!" she shouted, her finger trembling on the trigger. Then, from somewhere in the growing darkness, a voice rang out. "The lady asked you to leave her be." All heads turned toward the sound. A lone rider appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He sat tall in the saddle, motionless for a moment, then urged his horse down the slope toward them. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the leader called out. "Ride on if you know what's good for you." The newcomer continued his approach. his face becoming visible in the fading light. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the badge pinned to his vest glinted in the last rays of sunlight. "Actually, it is my concern," he said calmly. "I'm Deputy Marshal Reed Blackburn, and you boys are on territorial land." He reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out what looked like a bundle of cloth. The outlaws shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their weapons. In one fluid motion, the marshal lit a match and touched it to the cloth-wrapped torch he'd produced. The flame caught immediately, illuminating the scene with flickering orange light that revealed his face more clearly handsome, determined, and utterly unafraid. "Now, I count 6 of you," he said, holding the torch high, "and only one of me. But I've got this torch that makes me a mighty fine target for the 4 men I've got positioned in those rocks up there." He nodded toward the ridge where dark shapes could barely be made out against the sky. "And they're all excellent shots." Hazel held her breath, wondering if this was a bluff. She couldn't see anyone in the rocks, but the outlaws were looking nervous, glancing toward the ridge and then back at the marshal's confident face. "Last time I dealt with road agents in this territory, 2 ended up dead and 3 are serving time in the territorial prison." Reed continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "So you gentlemen have a choice to make, and I suggest you make it quickly." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Ain't nobody up there." Reed shrugged. "Care to test that theory?" He raised his free hand and made a quick signal. From the ridge came the distinct sound of a rifle being cocked, then another. The outlaws exchanged glances. Their bravado was crumbling. "We were just having some fun," one of them muttered. "Find your fun elsewhere," Reed said, his voice hardening. "Now ride out, and don't stop until you cross the Big Sandy. This territory is getting civilized, whether you like it or not." For a tense moment, Hazel thought they might fight, but then the leader spat on the ground, yanked his horse around, and galloped away. The others followed, dust swirling in their wake as they disappeared into the gathering darkness. Reed watched them go, holding the torch high until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Hazel, his expression softening. "You all right, miss?" Hazel lowered the shotgun, her hands shaking with relief. "Yes. Thank you." She studied his face in the torchlight, noting the kind eyes that contrasted with his tough demeanor. "There aren't really 4 men up in those rocks, are there?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not a soul, but they didn't need to know that." He moved his horse closer to her wagon. "It's not safe to be out here alone after dark. Coyote Creek's still a few miles off. There's a campsite just over that rise with good water. I can escort you there, if you'd like." Hazel hesitated. This man had just saved her, but she'd learned to be cautious. "Are you really a marshal?" In response, he held the torch closer to the badge on his vest. It was genuine, a U.S. Deputy Marshal's star. "Reed Blackburn, at your service. I patrol this stretch between Fort Smith and the new settlements." He paused. "And you are?" "Hazel O'Sullivan. I've purchased land near Coyote Creek, the Sullivan homestead." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Old Jim Sullivan's place? He passed last winter." Hazel nodded. "The land agent said it needed some work, but it has good water." "It does at that." Reed glanced at the darkening sky. "We should get moving. I can tell you about the place on the way." As they traveled the short distance to the campsite, Reed riding alongside her wagon with the torch lighting their way, Hazel found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet competence that made her feel safe for the first time since leaving St. Louis. The campsite was nestled in a small hollow beside a clear stream. Reed helped her unhitch Bessie and set up camp with practiced efficiency, starting a fire and helping her arrange the wagon for the night. "Those men," Hazel said as they sat by the fire, eating a simple meal of beans and hardtack that Reed had shared from his provisions. "Will they come back?" Reed poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night air. "Not likely. That was the Harmon gang, small-time thieves and troublemakers. They prey on travelers, but they're cowards at heart. Once they know the law has an eye on them, they usually move on to easier pickings." "Then I'm fortunate you came along when you did." He looked up at her, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Not fortune, madam. I've been tracking them for 2 days. When I saw a lone wagon heading this way, I figured they might make it a target." He paused. "Though I admit, I didn't expect to find a lady traveling alone." Hazel straightened her shoulders. "I can take care of myself, Marshal." "I believe you can, Miss O'Sullivan. That was some fine nerve, facing down 6 men with a shotgun." His smile was warm and genuine. "But even the bravest souls need allies out here." There was something in his tone, respect, not condescension, that made Hazel relax slightly. "My father died 3 months ago. There was nothing left for me in St. Louis, so when I saw the advertisement for cheap land in the territory, I decided to make a fresh start." Reed nodded. "It takes courage to start over. The territory isn't easy, but the people who survive here are special." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Jim Sullivan's place is rough, but it has potential. Good soil, plenty of water, some fruit trees that are still producing. You know it well?" "I patrol this whole area. Get to know all the homesteads eventually." He hesitated. "I should warn you, though it's been sitting empty for months, likely needs considerable work." Hazel sighed. "I'm prepared for that. I've saved enough to hire help with the heaviest repairs. Coyote Creek's growing. There's a general store now, a smithy, even a small church. Doc Wilson comes through once a month." Reed added more wood to the fire. "Still, it's a hard life for anyone, especially a woman alone," Hazel finished, a hint of defiance in her voice. Reed met her eyes steadily. "I was going to say, especially for someone new to frontier life, man or woman." Hazel looked away, slightly embarrassed by her quick assumption. "I'm sorry. I've grown accustomed to people underestimating me." "No offense taken." His voice was gentle. "Get some rest, Miss O'Sullivan. I'll keep watch tonight, and tomorrow I'll escort you the rest of the way to your property." "You don't need to do that. I'm sure you have other duties." "Actually, I'm heading to Coyote Creek myself. Judge Parker's circuit court will be in session, and I need to deliver some paperwork." He smiled. "So, it's no trouble at all?" Hazel found herself returning his smile, oddly comforted by the thought of having his company for a little longer. "Thank you, Marshal Blackburn." "Reed," he said. "Out here, formality doesn't survive long." "Reed," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "Thank you." As Hazel settled into her bedroll inside the wagon, she listened to the night sounds, the crackling fire, the soft movements of the horses, and the occasional call of a night bird. Somewhere nearby, Reed was keeping watch, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, she felt truly safe. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the prairie in gold. Hazel woke to the smell of coffee and found Reed already up, tending a small fire where a pot bubbled invitingly. "Hope you don't mind," he said, pouring a cup and offering it to her. "I'm an early riser." Hazel accepted the coffee gratefully. "It smells wonderful." She took a sip, the strong brew warming her from the inside. "How far to Coyote Creek from here?" "We should reach your place by midday if we make good time." Reed was already packing up his few belongings. "The town's another hour beyond that." They worked together to break camp, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised Hazel. There was something comfortable about Reed's presence, a lack of pretense that was refreshing after the stuffy propriety of St. Louis society. As they traveled, the landscape gradually changed, the flat prairie giving way to gentle rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and willows. Reed pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory tales of early settlers, conflicts with native tribes now mostly resolved through uneasy treaties, and the gradual taming of what had once been considered the wild frontier. "Things are changing fast," he explained as they crossed a shallow ford in the creek. "The railroad's coming through 50 miles south, more settlers arriving every month. Law and order's taking hold." "Is that why you became a marshal?" Hazel asked, curious about this man, who seemed so at home in this harsh but beautiful land. Reed's expression grew thoughtful. "My father was killed by outlaws when I was 15. They were never brought to justice." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "I joined the marshals 6 years ago, figuring maybe I could make a difference for someone else, even if I couldn't for him." The simple honesty of his answer touched Hazel. "I think you've already made a difference for me." Their eyes met briefly and something passed between them, a moment of connection that Hazel felt in her chest like a physical thing. Reed cleared his throat and pointed ahead. There's the ridge line that marks the northern boundary of your property. Sullivan's Creek runs just beyond it, down into that valley. Hazel leaned forward eagerly, taking in her first glimpse of the land that was now hers. The valley was beautiful, greener than the surrounding prairie thanks to the creek that wound through it. She could make out a small cabin nestled among trees, a barn listing slightly to one side, and what looked like the remains of a vegetable garden gone wild. "It's lovely," she breathed, already imagining what it could become with work and care. Reed watched her face, smiling at her obvious delight. "It's good land. Jim Sullivan was a decent man, but age and illness got the better of him before he could really make it thrive." As they drew closer, Hazel saw that the cabin was indeed in need of repair. The roof sagged in one corner, and several window panes were broken. The barn looked worse, its door hanging from a single hinge. But the creek bubbled merrily nearby, and wild roses grew alongside it, their pink blossoms bright against the green. Reed helped her down from the wagon when they reached the cabin's small porch. Hazel stood for a moment, taking it all in: the rough-hewn logs of the walls, the stone chimney, the magnificent view across the valley. "It needs work," she said, "but I can see its potential." Reed nodded. "Jim built it solid. The foundation's good, and that chimney will last 100 years. They explored the property together, Reed pointing out things Hazel might have missed: the good drainage of the land, the apple trees on the south slope, the natural meadow where hay could be grown. The cabin's interior was dusty but sound, with a large fireplace, a sturdy table, and a bed frame that needed only a new mattress. "The nearest neighbor is the Wilsons, about 2 miles that way," Reed said, pointing east as they stood outside again. "Good people. Mrs. Wilson will likely ride over once she hears someone's moved in." Hazel nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. This was really happening. This wild, beautiful place was her home now. "I should probably ride into town, let folks know you're here," Reed said, hesitating. "But I don't like leaving you alone your first night." "I'll be fine," Hazel assured him, though part of her wished he would stay. "You've already done more than enough." Reed looked unconvinced. "Those outlaws are probably long gone, but still. Really, I'll be all right. I have my shotgun. And you said yourself the Wilsons aren't far." She smiled at his concern. "Besides, I need to start managing on my own sometime." Reed reluctantly agreed. "I'll be back tomorrow with supplies from town. Is there anything specific you need?" Hazel gave him a short list: lamp oil, matches, flour, and a few other necessities. As he mounted his horse to leave, he paused, looking down at her with those kind eyes that had begun to affect her in ways she hadn't expected. "Bolt the door tonight," he said, "and keep that shotgun handy, just in case." "I will," she promised. "Thank you, Reed, for everything." He tipped his hat to her. "Welcome to Oklahoma Territory, Miss Hazel O'Sullivan. I think you're going to do just fine here." As she watched him ride away, Hazel felt a curious emptiness, as if the valley had suddenly grown larger and lonelier without his presence. Shaking off the feeling, she turned back to the cabin. There was work to be done before nightfall. The next few hours passed quickly as Hazel swept out years of dust, washed windows with water from the creek, and made the cabin as habitable as possible with her limited supplies. She found a stack of firewood behind the house and built a small fire in the fireplace, chasing away the dampness that clung to the walls. As darkness fell, she heated beans over the fire and ate them with the last of her journey bread, sitting on the porch and watching the stars appear one by one in the vast sky overhead. It was different here, bigger somehow. The stars seemed closer, the darkness deeper, the silence more complete than anything she'd known in St. Louis. Hazel wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, listening to the night sounds: crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rushing of the creek. This was home now, her home. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. True to her promise, Hazel bolted the door before sleeping, her father's shotgun propped against the wall beside her makeshift bed. But, despite Reed's warnings, she slept soundly, exhausted from the day's work and lulled by the gentle sounds of the creek outside her window. She woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the clean windows. After a quick breakfast of the last of her provisions, Hazel set to work on the small garden plot, pulling weeds and turning the soil, imagining the vegetables she would grow. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching rider until he called out a greeting. Looking up, she shaded her eyes against the sun and felt an unexpected leap of joy when she recognized Reed Blackburn. He dismounted, leading his horse and a mule laden with supplies. "Morning, Miss O'Sullivan. Looks like you've been busy already." Hazel brushed dirt from her hands and went to meet him. "Good morning. Yes, I'm trying to reclaim this garden. I think it was quite productive once." "It was. Jim grew the best tomatoes in the territory." Reed began unloading packages from the mule. "I've brought your supplies, and a few extras folks in town sent along when they heard a new settler was moving in." Hazel was touched by the gesture. "That's very kind. That's how it works out here. Everyone helps each other." He handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house sent fresh bread and preserves, said no one should start a new home without proper food." They carried the supplies inside, and Hazel marveled at the generosity, not just the items she'd requested, but also a sack of seed potatoes, garden tools, a quilt, and even a small potted rosemary plant. "The town seems welcoming," she said, arranging the provisions on the cabin's single shelf. "They are. Most folks remember how hard their own beginnings were." Reed hesitated, then added, "I also brought some help." "Help? For the repairs?" He gestured outside where Hazel now noticed 3 men approaching on horseback. "That's Sam Wilson, your neighbor, and his sons, Luke and Matthew. They're handy with tools and offered to fix your roof and that barn door." The Wilson men proved to be friendly and efficient. While Sam and his older son Luke tackled the roof, Reed and young Matthew fixed the barn door and mended the corral fence. Hazel provided coffee and freshly baked biscuits using the supplies Reed had brought, feeling a sense of community she hadn't expected to find so quickly in this remote place. By late afternoon, the most urgent repairs were complete. The Wilsons declined Hazel's offer of payment, insisting that neighbors helped neighbors, but accepted her promise of fresh vegetables once her garden was producing. Before they left, Sam invited her to Sunday dinner the following week, an invitation she gratefully accepted. As the Wilson men rode away, Reed lingered, helping Hazel carry water from the creek to fill the barrel by the kitchen door. "They like you," he said, setting down the heavy buckets. "The Wilsons are well respected. Their approval means a lot in a small community like this." Hazel smiled, pleased. "They seem like good people. This whole day has been unexpected. I thought frontier life would be more solitary. It can be, especially in winter. But people here understand that survival depends on helping each other." Reed leaned against the porch rail, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. "Will you be all right alone tonight? I could camp nearby if you're concerned." The offer was tempting, but Hazel shook her head. "I need to get used to being on my own. Besides, the cabin feels much more secure with the repairs you've all made today." Reed nodded, though she thought she detected disappointment in his eyes. "I should head back to town then. Judge Parker's court convenes tomorrow, and I need to prepare." "Of course." Hazel walked with him to his horse. "Thank you again for everything." Reed mounted, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'll check on you in a few days, if that's all right. My patrol route passes near here." "I'd like that," Hazel said, surprised by how much she meant it. As Reed rode away, Hazel realized she was already looking forward to his next visit, counting the days in her mind. The thought both alarmed and excited her. She hadn't come to Oklahoma Territory looking for anything but independence and a fresh start. Attachment to anyone, especially a man, hadn't been part of her plan, and yet, as she returned to the cabin that now felt more like home thanks to Reed and the Wilsons, Hazel found herself wondering if perhaps her new life might hold possibilities she hadn't considered. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Hazel settled into her new home. Each day brought new challenges: a leaking roof during a sudden rainstorm, figuring out how to manage the temperamental cook stove, clearing enough of the garden to plant her first crops. But each success, no matter how small, filled her with satisfaction. This place was becoming hers in a way no home had ever been before. True to his word, Reed stopped by 3 days after helping with the repairs. He arrived in the late afternoon, bringing mail that had come for her from St. Louis and news from town. They sat on the porch drinking coffee. and Hazel found herself laughing at his stories of frontier justice and the colorful characters who appeared before Judge Parker's court. "You make it sound entertaining, but I imagine your work can be dangerous," she said, noting the way his hand occasionally strayed to the scar on his forearm. Reed's expression grew more serious. "It has its moments. The territory's safer than it was 10 years ago, but there are still those who think the law doesn't apply to them." He glanced at her. "But that's changing. Communities like Coyote Creek are the future families building something lasting." "Is that what you want?" Hazel asked. "A family, a permanent home?" Reed looked out across the valley, his profile strong against the setting sun. "I didn't think so, not for a long time. The job seemed enough." He turned back to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Lately, though, I've been reconsidering." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Hazel felt her cheeks warm and looked away, suddenly conscious of how improper it was to be alone with him like this, how scandalized her St. Louis acquaintances would be. But this wasn't St. Louis, and the old rules seemed as distant as the city itself. Reed seemed to sense her discomfort and smoothly changed the subject, asking about her garden plans. By the time he left, the awkward moment had passed, but something had shifted between them, a recognition of feelings neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Reed's visits became a regular occurrence over the next month. Sometimes he brought supplies from town or mail. Other times, he simply stopped to check on her while passing through on patrol. Each visit left Hazel more certain that what she felt for him was deepening into something more than gratitude or friendship. The Sunday dinner at the Wilsons' was a revelation. Their homestead was larger and more established than Hazel's, with a 2-story house, a proper barn, and fields of wheat rippling in the breeze. Mrs. Wilson Sarah welcomed Hazel like a long-lost daughter, ushering her into a home filled with delicious smells and the sounds of family life. "We're so pleased you've taken over Jim Sullivan's place," Sarah said as they prepared the meal together. "It's good land, and we hated seeing it sit empty." "I'm lucky to have such wonderful neighbors," Hazel replied, genuinely touched by their kindness. "And it seems you've caught Marshal Blackburn's eye," Sarah added with a knowing smile. "He's never made so many patrols past our place as he has this past month." Hazel blushed. "We're just friends. He's been kind enough to help me settle in." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "Of course, and he's a good man, one of the best. Been turning down invitations to Sunday dinner from every family with a marriageable daughter between here and Fort Smith for years." "But not mine," Hazel said before she could stop herself. "Not yours," Sarah agreed, her smile widening. "Interesting, isn't it?" The dinner was joyful, with Sam Wilson telling stories of the early days of the settlement, the boys discussing their plans to expand the farm, and Sarah insisting Hazel take home a jar of preserves and a loaf of fresh bread. When Sam offered to drive Hazel home in their wagon, she accepted gratefully, already feeling like part of their extended family. As spring turned to summer, Hazel's little homestead began to flourish. The garden produced abundantly, the fruit trees blossomed and set fruit, and she even acquired a milk cow and some chickens with Reed's help. The cabin's interior was transformed with small touches curtains at the windows, a rag rug on the floor, wild flowers in a jar on the table. Reed's visits continued, each one leaving Hazel more certain of her feelings for him. They never spoke of it directly, but it was there in the way his hand lingered when he helped her down from the wagon, in the way they sat together on the porch watching sunsets, in the special smile he seemed to reserve just for her. Then came the day that changed everything. It began normally enough. Hazel was harvesting vegetables from her thriving garden when the sound of approaching riders caught her attention. Looking up, she expected to see Reed, or perhaps the Wilsons, but instead felt a chill of recognition. 6 men on horseback, led by a large man on a black stallion. The Harmon gang had returned. Hazel dropped her basket and ran for the cabin, where her shotgun was propped beside the door. She reached it just as the riders entered the yard, spreading out to surround the cabin just as they had surrounded her wagon months before. "Well, look who it is, boys," the leader Harmon called out. "The little lady with the shotgun. Looks like you've settled in right nice, miss." Hazel stood on the porch, the shotgun steady in her hands. "You're trespassing on my property, Mr. Harmon. I suggest you leave." Harmon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Remembered my name, did you? I'm flattered." His expression hardened. But we've got unfinished business, you and me. That marshal of yours embarrassed us something fierce. Made us look like fools." "That was your doing, not his," Hazel replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Now leave before there's trouble." "Oh, there's going to be trouble, all right," Harmon said, dismounting. Two of his men followed suit. "Your marshal friend isn't here to save you this time. We watched, made sure of it. He rode out toward Fort Smith yesterday." Hazel's stomach dropped. Reed had mentioned he would be away for a few days, testifying at a trial. The Wilsons were too far to hear a gunshot, and she couldn't outrun 6 men. "What do you want?" she asked, playing for time, mind racing for a solution. "Well, now, that's a good question." Harmon stepped closer, just out of shotgun range. "First, I want that gun. Then I want whatever valuables you've got stashed in that cabin. And then maybe we'll burn this pretty little homestead to the ground, just to send a message to your marshal." "I don't think so," Hazel said, raising the shotgun to her shoulder and aiming it directly at Harmon's chest. Harmon's smile widened. "You won't shoot. And even if you did, you'd only get one of us. Then what?" He was right, and they both knew it. 1 shotgun against 6 armed men was no contest. But Hazel had something they didn't know about. "You boys might want to look behind you," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. It was a desperate gamble, but to her surprise, it worked momentarily. Several of the men glanced over their shoulders. Distracted just long enough for Hazel to dart into the cabin and bolt the door, shouts of anger erupted outside as Hazel rushed to the fireplace, grabbing the bundle Reed had helped her prepare for just such an emergency. It was a torch, similar to the one he had used that first night, wrapped in cloth soaked in kerosene and bound with wire to a sturdy stick. She struck a match, lit the torch, and moved quickly to the cabin's single window that faced the creek. Opening it, she thrust the blazing torch outside, waving it 3 times the signal she and Reed had arranged, the signal that would bring help if anyone saw it. Outside, Harmon and his men were pounding on the door. "Open up! You've got nowhere to go, lady!" Hazel positioned herself at the window with the shotgun. "I've signaled for help," she shouted. "The marshal has men stationed at the Wilson farm. They'll be here any minute." It was a bluff, just like Reed's had been that first night. But unlike then, Hazel had no idea if it would work. The pounding on the door intensified, and Hazel heard the crack of wood beginning to splinter. She raised the shotgun, prepared to defend herself if they broke through. The torch was still burning beside her, its flame reflected in the window glass, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Then, miraculously, she heard it, hoofbeats, approaching fast. Not from the direction of the Wilson farm, but from the west, along the creek trail. A shout went up from one of Harmon's lookouts. "Riders coming! At least 3 of them!" "It's a bluff!" Harmon snarled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. The hoofbeats grew louder. And then a voice Hazel recognized called out, "U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons." Reed. It was Reed's voice. Through the window, Hazel saw the outlaws scrambling, caught between continuing their assault on the cabin and responding to this new threat. Harmon was shouting orders, trying to organize his men, but panic was spreading among them. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, a warning shot fired over the outlaws' heads. Then Reed appeared in Hazel's line of sight, riding hard into the yard, rifle in hand. Behind him came 2 more riders Hazel didn't recognize, similarly armed. "Drop your weapons and put your hands up," Reed commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Harmon, you're under arrest for attempted robbery, assault, and violating the terms of your parole." For a moment, it seemed Harmon might resist. His hand hovered near his gun, his face twisted with rage and indecision. But as Reed and his companions spread out, weapons trained on the outlaws, Harmon's shoulders slumped in defeat. He raised his hands slowly, followed one by his men. Hazel leaned against the window frame, weak with relief, the shotgun forgotten in her hands. Outside, Reed and the other marshals were disarming the outlaws, binding their hands with rope. Only when all 6 men were secured did Reed look toward the cabin. "Hazel," he called, concern evident in his voice. "Are you all right?" She unbolted the door with trembling hands and stepped onto the porch. Reed dismounted immediately and rushed to her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice shook slightly. "They didn't get in." Reed's face was pale beneath his tan, his eyes intense as they met hers. "When I saw the torch, I've never ridden so fast in my life. I didn't know if you'd see it. You said you'd be at Fort Smith for days. The trial ended early. I was on my way back when I saw the smoke." He glanced at the torch still burning on the windowsill. "I'm just thankful I was close enough." One of the other marshals approached, interrupting their conversation. "We need to get these men to the jail in Coyote Creek, Reed. Want us to take them now, or wait for you?" Reed hesitated, looking back at Hazel. "Go," she said softly. "I'll be fine now." Still, he lingered. "I'll be back as soon as they're locked up," he promised. "Will you be all right until then?" Hazel nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the concern in his eyes that went beyond a marshal's duty to a citizen. Reed seemed about to say something more, then thought better of it. With a final nod, he returned to his horse and joined his fellow marshals in escorting the prisoners away. As the group disappeared down the trail, Hazel sat heavily on the porch steps, the events of the past hour catching up with her. She had faced down dangerous men, defended her home, and survived not just because of Reed's timely arrival, but because of her own courage and quick thinking. For the first time, Hazel truly felt that she belonged here, on this land, in this wild, beautiful territory that demanded everything of those who chose to make it their home. By the time Reed returned, the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple. Hazel had recovered her composure and was cooking supper, the familiar routine helping to settle her nerves. When she heard hoofbeats approaching, she stepped onto the porch, a sense of anticipation replacing the fear she'd felt earlier. Reed looked exhausted but relieved as he dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post. Without a word, he crossed the yard and climbed the porch steps, stopping just short of where Hazel stood. "They're locked up," he said. "Harmon will be heading back to the territorial prison for violating his parole. The others will stand trial next month." "Thank you," Hazel said softly, "for coming back when you did. I should never have left, knowing they were still out there somewhere." His voice was tight with self-recrimination. "You couldn't have known they'd come here, but I should have." Reed ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Harmon's had a grudge against me for years, since I arrested his brother. I should have realized he might target you to get to me." Hazel stepped closer, close enough to see the fatigue in his eyes, the lines of worry etched around his mouth. "This isn't your fault, Reed. When I saw that torch," his voice broke slightly, "all I could think was that I might be too late, that you might be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "But you weren't too late," Hazel said gently. "I'm fine. We're both fine." Reed looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression changed. The professional mask of the marshal fell away, leaving just the man vulnerable, caring, and suddenly very certain about something. "I love you," he said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a tangible thing. "I think I've loved you since that first night, when you faced down 6 outlaws with nothing but a shotgun and sheer nerve." Hazel's breath caught in her throat. Though she had begun to hope, to suspect he might care for her, hearing the words spoken aloud was overwhelming. "I know it's too soon," Reed continued when she didn't immediately respond. "We've only known each other a few months, and I know you came here to be independent, not to—" Hazel closed the distance between them, placing her fingers gently against his lips to silence him. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you lit that torch and bluffed those outlaws into running away." Reed's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when Hazel responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably mention that I never planned on falling in love with the stubborn, beautiful woman whose wagon I rescued," he said, a smile in his voice. "It's highly unprofessional of me as a marshal." Hazel laughed softly. "And I never planned on falling in love with the equally stubborn marshal who keeps finding excuses to patrol past my homestead." She looked up at him, suddenly serious again. "What happens now?" Reed took her hands in his expression earnest. "That depends on you. I know you value your independence, this place you've built for yourself. I wouldn't ask you to give that up. What are you asking then? His smile returned, tender and a little nervous. I'm asking if you might consider sharing at your independence, your homestead, your life. Not right away, he added quickly. We can take time, court properly like folks back east. I just want to know if there might be a future for us, together. Hazel looked around at the homestead she'd worked so hard to establish, the thriving garden, the repaired barn, the cozy cabin that felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Then she looked back at Reed, seeing in his eyes the promise of something even more precious: partnership, understanding, love. I think, she said slowly, that this place was always meant for more than just me. It needs a family to truly flourish. Hope blossomed in Reed's expression. Is that a yes? It's a court me properly and ask me again in a few months, Hazel replied with a smile. But yes, Reed Blackburn, I think there is definitely a future for us together. Reed laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. I can work with that. He pulled her close again, his arms strong and secure around her. Though I should warn you, Miss O'Sullivan, I'm not known for my patience when I set my mind to something. Neither am I, Marshal Blackburn, Hazel replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. Neither am I. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Hazel and Reed stood together on the porch of what would become their home, their future stretching before them like the vast Oklahoma prairie wild, challenging and full of promise. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold and crimson on the hills surrounding Coyote Creek, Hazel O'Sullivan became Hazel Blackburn in a simple ceremony at the town's small church. Sarah Wilson had sewn a beautiful wedding dress from cream-colored satin ordered specially from St. Louis, and the entire community turned out to celebrate, filling the church to overflowing and providing enough food for the wedding feast to feed twice their number. Reed, handsome in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off his bride as they spoke their vows before Reverend Taylor, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Hazel's heart felt too full for words as she made the same promises in return, scarcely believing that this man, strong, kind, and true, was to be her husband. Judge Parker himself had traveled from Fort Smith to attend, granting Reed a full week's leave from his marshal duties for a proper honeymoon. The territory can survive without you for 7 days, Blackburn, the judge had said gruffly. Though not much longer than that, mind you. After the ceremony and celebration, they traveled by wagon to their homestead, their home which had been transformed yet again in the months since Reed's proposal. The cabin had been expanded with a new bedroom and a proper kitchen. The barn was rebuilt, now housing not only Bessie and Reed's horse, but also 2 new draft horses for plowing the expanded fields where Reed planned to grow wheat and corn alongside Hazel's thriving vegetable garden. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackburn, Reed said the evening, as he carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down gently in the middle of the cabin that now bore touches of both their personalities, her curtains and cushions softening his practical furniture, her books mingling with his on the new shelves he'd built. It's perfect, Hazel said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. The fire crackling in the hearth, the table set for their first meal as husband and wife, the comfortable chairs drawn up close to the fire where they could sit together in the evenings. Reed wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin atop her head. Not quite perfect yet, he murmured, but it will be in time. Hazel turned in his embrace, looking up into the face that had become as dear to her as her own. It's perfect because we're building it together, she said. Everything else is just details. Reed's smile was tender as he bent to kiss her, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a future neither of them had imagined that evening when outlaws surrounded her wagon at dusk, until a marshal with a torch and a bluff had driven them off and, in doing so, changed both their lives forever. As winter settled over Oklahoma territory, bringing shorter days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Hazel and Reed Blackburn found a rhythm to their shared life that suited them both perfectly. Reed continued his duties as a marshal, but arranged his patrols to keep him closer to home more often than not. Hazel maintained her garden and expanded her skills to include caring for their growing herd of cattle and helping Reed with the larger fields they now cultivated together. They made plans for the future, a larger house eventually, when they needed it. More land, perhaps, as the homestead prospered, and someday children to fill the rooms with laughter and the kind of love they'd found in each other. "I never thought I'd find this," Reed said one evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, despite the chill in the air. A home, a purpose beyond the badge, someone to share it all with. Hazel leaned against his shoulder, her hand in his. "I came west looking for independence," she replied, "and found that true independence isn't about being alone. It's about having the freedom to choose who you share your life with." Reed squeezed her hand, a gesture that had come to say all the things words sometimes couldn't, that he understood, that he was grateful, that he'd loved her more with each passing day. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Oklahoma sky, they moved inside to the warmth of their home, a home built on courage, perseverance, and the kind of love that transforms not just two people, but the very land they inhabit. And though challenges would come, harsh winters and dry summers, difficult neighbors and dangerous outlaws, Hazel and Reed faced them together, stronger as a pair than either had ever been alone. Their homestead flourished, becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory, a testament to what could be achieved when two determined spirits joined forces. 5 years after that fateful meeting, when outlaws surrounded Hazel's wagon at dusk, the Blackburn homestead was the site of another gathering, a joyous one this time, celebrating the birth of their second child, a daughter to join their 2-year-old son. Friends and neighbors from miles around came to welcome little Sarah Elizabeth Blackburn, named for the two women who had most influenced her parents' lives, Sarah Wilson, who had become like a mother to Hazel, and Elizabeth Blackburn, Reed's mother, who had raised him alone after his father's death. As Reed held his newborn daughter, marveling at her tiny, perfect features, he looked across the room at Hazel, tired but radiant in the bed they shared. Their son James was curled up beside her, fascinated by his new sister. "Did I ever tell you," Reed said quietly as the last of their visitors departed, leaving the family alone, "that the night I found those outlaws surrounding your wagon, I almost took a different trail home? If I had—" He let the thought trail off, unable to imagine a life without the woman and children before him. Hazel smiled, reaching for his hand. "But you didn't. You were exactly where you needed to be, when I needed you most." "We both were," Reed replied, settling carefully on the bed beside her, their children between them, the family they had created together against all odds, in this wild and beautiful land they now called home. Outside, the Oklahoma sun set on another day, its golden light bathing the prosperous homestead in warmth, a light that seemed to promise that, for the Blackburn family, the best days were still to come.